Hello everyone, I'm Exodia, and today we are doing episode 6 in our scripting tutorial series in Roblox Studio. Today we'll be going over values in more depth as well as while loops. So we can make a new script in server script service, call it whatever you want, as long as it helps keep you organized. I will call this Roblox Scripting Beginner Series episode 6. And before we actually get into any code, I would like to go over the values because actually there are objects or classes for each value in Roblox Studio. Now if we go into the workspace and we click on this plus sign, we can type in value and you can see a lot of things show up. The main things we'll be focusing on today are bool values, int values, number values, object values, and string values. Now let's actually make one of each of those. So we will call the bool value bool, call the int value, we'll call that int. We can call the number value number. The string value can be called string, and then the object value can be called object. Now going over these things, we will start in order of how they are in our workspace. A boolean is the simplest value of them all. It can only have two possible values, that being true or false. You may remember when we were talking about if statements, if you watch that video, where you have to write a condition that must be met, and usually that condition will output a true or false value. That typically is what we refer to as a Boolean value. It's a really simple value. True or false are the only two values you can have. As you can see in this
I'm here.
item, it has that value you can tick to true or false. So next we'll move on to the int. And so the int, basically if you are programming in C#, for example, then this will often be referred to as an int value. It could be any whole number, negative or positive, so we could set this value to 8, we could set this value to -4. We cannot do decimals though. It'll usually it will not return, like, you'll get an error if this is a decimal value because an int value must be a whole number. Now, if you want to solve that issue, we can move on to number values. If you're programming in C# or another program language like Java or Python, this will be referred to as a float value. What a float value, or as referred to in Roblox Studio, a number value is it's simply a number that can have a decimal value. Now we can define this as 1.25, for example, and this would be acceptable. If you want to have player data, for example, in your game, I recommend using integer values if you're having like a cache value, so long as you don't want to have decimals. When you get to things where you want to have a decimal of that value, when you're making your game, I would use numbers over that. A string is, we'll move on to the string. A string is also a pretty simple value. This is just a line of text. Now, when we go into script, oftentimes, as you can see in these quotation marks, hello world, this is a string value, a line of text. Usually via script, you would have to write your string with parentheses. This is, or quotations, I mean. This is a string. However, when you're using a string value, that is not required. You could just write your line of text, and then you can use that in your script. Then the last thing that we need to worry about is the object value. Now, what object values do is you can store an object. So, for example, we will store this base plate as the object. If you want to set the value, as you saw me do, you have to click on it, and then you have to click on the value, and then you click on the object you want to store. I thought you could drag it, but yeah, you have to click on the value and then click on an object to assign it, or you can assign it via script. Now, these values can all be used and changed in your script. Let's make a variable for each of them. So if you don't know what a variable is, you could basically think of it as a box, and how we write variables in Roblox's Lua is we put local at the start of the line, then we write our variable name. So in this case we'll do bool. If you want to define the name of the variable later, maybe you want to declare the variable on this line, you put an underscore before it, then you could just leave the rest of the line blank. But here we are going to set it equal to workspace.bool. Now what we've done here, workspace.bool, this is getting the bool inside of the workspace. And then we could do the same thing for our int values. .int. Also another way to get your workspace is game.workspace. And when you write it like this, the workspace has to have a capital W. However, it is a little faster to write workspace.int as it means the same thing. Local number equals workspace.number. Local string equals workspace.string. And actually, because there is a string in Lua, like in the syntax, this is something built in, we can call this string value instead, just so there isn't any confusion when we are declaring our variable in our code. Then local object equals workspace.object. Now, what can we do with these things? We could set their values to new things, and also we can make conditions with the values of these items. So, for example, with the bool, we could set the bool value to be equal to true. By default, if you do not set a value, this will default to false. For the int, we could set, I did this wrong. When you're declaring a new value for these, you have to do bool.value. Value is part of the syntax inside of these values, and every time you're declaring a new value, or every time you're trying to say compare values, maybe you want to compare two ints, and you're using these values, you'll do int.value, for example. We can set this equal to 8 or 9, I guess, number.value. And as you can see, with the IDE in Roblox Studio, value will autofill equals 4.5 string value dot value equals this is a string, and then object dot value equals workspace dot, and we'll set this to the base plate, because the thing about the object value is you have to set it to an object inside of your game, otherwise it will not work. Oftentimes, when this will be most commonly used, is you can almost use it as like a tag. Say you have a sword or a gun, and you want to say you want to award the player cash in your game when they, in PvP, when they kill a player. Oftentimes, you will use an object value to set you'll make it inside the victim of the kill, and then you'll set this value to the person that killed the victim, and then you can award the cash using the value of this object value. Now what we can do with this, we can print their value to the output for say, or we can also make a conditional statement. If int dot value is greater than or equal to 5, then, and this is an if statement, you write if, then, and in between these you have to write a condition which must return a true or false value. If it is a true value, then this code will run. If it's a false value, then nothing will happen with how we have this if statement set up. And then we could do print int concatenate is greater than 5, and when you concatenate, you can int.value, you can use a string value, or like you could set a value, you could put it inside of a string. It basically will just merge it so long as it can be a string. Like in this case, we'd probably have to make this a toString. What a toString does is it converts the thing inside of the parentheses. In this case, our int value's value. It'll convert that into a string so we can tack it on to the print. And yeah, the values are pretty simple. Before attributes were actually added down here, these were the dominant way of making tools. For example, if you wanted to make a tool and you had your, maybe you had part and you wanted to make a gun, this would be your gun, you'd before have to put like an int value or in fact a number value, and you'd have to call this reload time. It got really messy. Attributes made it a lot easier to do that, as it made it easier to organize. You could just put everything on the tool without having it be a value inside of it. But yeah, you may still find some use with these values if maybe attributes are a bit confusing or overwhelming, or these work better than attributes. You'll use the values over it. But anyways, now we will move on to while loops. So now we are getting on to loops, and there are three main loops inside of Roblox Studio's Lua, and that'll be while loops, and then for loops. And there are two different kinds of for loops. When you're for I v in pairs, then a table that you're looping through, then for I equals your start value, your end value, and then your increment value do. These loops are not important right now. They will likely be the last tutorial video that we cover in the beginner series, as they are the most difficult to understand. And I also think they're one of the most crucial things for the beginner to learn, because they are a very useful tool when you're scripting. But yeah, in this case, we're just going to talk about while loops, which are a lot easier to grasp and a lot easier to use. So how would you write a while loop in Roblox's Lua? You write while, and just like with if statements, we write a condition that must return a true or false value. So, for example, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Do. And what this does is, I believe it'll run, if you don't have a wait of any kind to yield it, so what we can do is we can write a wait. And so basically what wait does is it'll wait a certain amount of time in seconds that you put inside this parentheses. In this case, this wait would cause the script to yield for a single second, and then the code would run like normal afterwards. Otherwise, I believe this will run 60 times a second. So it is a really bad practice to not put a wait or any type of yield inside of your while true do or your while loops, because it can cause your game to crash as for like an overload. So yeah, oftentimes sometimes you'll see it written like while wait 2. You'll have that wait in the condition. This isn't as good of practice. Typically, the most simple way you'd see it written is while true do. But yeah, for the sake of this, actually we can also use our int value. We can use our int value for this example, int. So we'll make a variable for the int value. Local int equals workspace.int. And then we'll make the condition for this while int is greater than or equal to 5 do. Now, when we set a condition like this in the while loop, this loop will run so long as this condition is met. If the int value is greater than or equal to 5, then all this code will be looped through and basically repeated. So we'll have a wait 1 here so that the loop is happening and the code is repeating every second. And then we will print here, just to do something simple, we'll print int dot value concatenate is greater than 5. and then we'll set the int value local int equals 7, or not local, int.value will equal 7, my bad. And here, if we run this code right here, oh, I didn't write dot value. It is really crucial when you're working with values and you define them as a variable in your script.
What is a value? I have no value.
Int dot value in our case inside of this condition.
Don't disturb
Otherwise, you will get an error inside of your code. It's always okay to get errors. It is a part of programming. But as you can see, our print is working in our loop, and it's happening every second. It's getting repeated into the output. Now, if we wanted, basically, as we could see, int.value is greater than or equal to 5, and we're setting it to 7. This condition is met. If we were to set this condition to be int.value, maybe we wanted to make it 3, then, as you could see, this would only run once, because our condition is no longer met, because the int value is changed.
What?
Maybe we can do a wait 5, and then change the int value back to, say, 10. Now, when our code runs, we'll have the print and int value will be set to not meet the condition.
I
then
got
after
2
the
cups
5
of
seconds,
orange juice in my hand.
our condition should be met again.
No.
Actually, I believe it would not. I believe if we want this to work, we'd have to make a function. And then, so a function will allow you to execute a code in like a certain block, and rather than repeating it, you could like call it at any part of the script. So local function my loop.
So yeah, Red.
Hmm?
Well, one thing you didn't know about Dreamer, probably? When you play as Dreamer, Red,
Call my loop.
you play on a mode called
When the loop
milliseconds.
ends, or the condition
I know.
Call my loop again.
I watched a video, I know.
No, you don't.
One thing, so functions, before I forget to
I
explain
watched
them,
a video, so of
how a
course
function
I
works
know.
is you write local function and then your function name with open close parentheses, then you drop a line, then this end will pop up at the bottom. Any code you put inside of this function will be ran when you call the function. In Roblox Lua, you have to call the function before you can use it, in this case. You can't put the function below the call, as I tried to do. That'll return an error because the function is not made. This is proper practice for making functions. You usually make them local functions. But yeah, in this case, let's see what happens. As you can see, I think what's actually happening is because
It seems to be really fun whenever you have whenever you get all 3 abilities every single time.
So yeah,
I'm gonna watch
pretty easy topics, but once again,
I watched the video again.
Please let me know in the comments. I will.
I want to have this many abilities in that. It'd be so much fun.
If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe. If you did not find this video helpful, please let me know, as I'm always trying to improve my tutorials. So yeah, see you.